I call it USS Alabama thinking. It's the idea of the thought process and memory. Okay, so we can talk about that a little bit. And one of the things I'm constantly thinking about in terms of the battleship is the idea of vessel. And what do I mean by that? You know, like I see it kind of like almost kind of a human form in terms of it has all these different components that make it all kind of come together. It's about 70% complete at this point. And there are certain symbols that are universal. You know, if we kind of look at this, I mean, what is this thing right over here? You know, it's a Statue of Liberty, and I think anybody in the world that would, you know, majority of people would be able to kind of identify that. And when I look at it, you know, I was thinking like, how do I get an image that represents the collective we? And it has something that really says something about the United States. And if you also look at this, the piece, the boat image, it's the idea of balance. You know, and this is going to have a piece, I'm going to show you the other components here in just a minute, but there is a part that will have, and I've got two different plumb bobs, there's going to be a structure that kind of comes up like this, and then there's going to be the structure goes on the other side, and then there's going to be a plumb bob that'll kind of be rested right over here. So the idea of technology, again, of being focused and so forth. When if you look at, I have, there's 6 different bowls. Originally the idea was that this was going to be a circle and a pattern, and each one of these have different, what I would call, you know, like memories. You know, like almost like if you went up into your parents' or grandparents' attic, and you found a locker where, you know, where you'd find a uniform and letters that were sent and cards that were played and whatnot. You know, so you know, if you look at this, I just have a pocket watch. I wear a pocket watch constantly, but it's a metaphor of what? Time. You guys are young folks, but time goes, and it really kind of passes. You know, when I look at there's cards, the idea of passing of time. When I look at this, you know, it's the idea of another bowl, and these are bot bowls, so I want to kind of form the uniform, but the idea of technology, you know, and all those different engineering feats in terms of kind of holding it together. If you look at this, there's again 6 bowls that we have here. Another one, these are actually from sewing machines, and I just absolutely love these forms. I actually use them for in ceramics, but just little vessels, but the idea of taking care of, or the machining of the ship. Let's see, I'll go to the other side here in a second, but then I'm going to have boxes. There are going to be 6 different boxes that kind of fit inside, and if you notice, there's a pattern here, and it's the idea is high tech and low tech. The bandsaw blade actually was wavering a little bit. There's what's called a guide block. 4 guide blocks that hold a blade in place, and it started to move. And I actually like that kind of random cut that it had, and it'll kind of play off of the high technology with it. But they're going to be boxes that fit inside. It'll be something very similar to this. And they won't be store-bought. I'm going to make them. They'll be boxed like this, and then so they'll fit inside these areas. Something like that. Okay, so so you kind of pull inside of it. It won't have a top on it, and then I'm going to have maps of Alabama. Okay, and I'll kind of fold them. I've got to kind of work out the details on it, but it'll probably be a white box or a dark box, and there'll be a map that's kind of folded on the inside of it or part. And then I'm going to have maps of the Pacific Ocean. You know, so that the idea of going from, well, this is of South America, but you know, the idea of destination of one place. One of the things I was actually interested in kind of putting in this, and it's kind of brought in an idea for larger pieces, is the idea of even bringing some Alabama dirt. When I think of Alabama, the idea of one thing I absolutely love here is the red, you know, the red iron-based, you know, the dirt that we have here, and I was going to put some of that. I wanted to have a piece of metal that would be sitting in water and become rusting, and then just allow it to dry, and it would kind of again represent, you know, potentially decay, or you know, that's a constant feat that they're having to do with the boat. Is the steel is wanting to do what? It wants to go back where it came from, and you know, and oxidize, and then it, you know, that then bring it back in. Now, if we look at the others, also just a ruler, and it's one of those things that sometimes as I'm thinking these things out, I'm moving parts around as an artist. I'm kind of thinking, you know, and all of us have parts, you know, it's like, and like, what does this mean to me? You know, like what does a ruler mean? You know, and there's all kinds of different things. And like, if I look at this the proportions or what happens with the piece, is like if I take it away, it becomes a completely different piece than what's happening here. Now this will be screwed in, little high-tech screws. I love again that high-tech and low-tech. And let me grab another piece I'm going to show you. I'm going to reach behind you guys. And there's always that, it started off, if you notice the circle up underneath here. I think what's going to happen with this, and this is, you guys recognize what it is. It's a hula hoop that my dogs have got a hold of, you know, but I kind of neutralize it. But I have a piece of metal that I'll probably, that will probably work. It'll be something of that scale. And then I'm going to paint black and white lines across here again. So the idea of kind of focusing in, you know, and it becomes, if you know, Leonardo da Vinci's really famous, and this is something I'm constantly thinking about. I've worked on a series for the last 20 years, a series of works of horses or portraits that were centered, and it's a self-centered series. But it's always that idea of like standing out, you know, that relationship, and I always think of that in terms of ego, you know, and not egotism again, but the idea of, you know, the idea of the self, that metaphor. You know, so this becomes the circle of which it's in. Now, if you come back in, or if you look at this other side, can I move over in here? Okay. One of the things that I was interested in is that originally I wanted to have 12 or 14 different bowls, and there were going to be all these different parts. And that's a fun part of as I'm working on a piece, things change, and I start to respond to it. I actually wanted to originally throw the bowls, but I like the idea of that, again, the contrast in the high tech and low tech. Now, all of these things that you look in here, they you know, if you look at pocket change, we all have that same, we know what that is. If you look at glasses, we all kind of can understand that. You know, here I have a bowl of letters. What could that mean? You know, it's the idea of random chance, you know, of the different, it becomes symbolic of all of the men, and I believe there were men and women on, you know, that have been part of the USS Alabama, and all those folks that really sacrificed in World War II, you know, and their memory, their DNA. I mean, it all becomes part of what? It's part of us, you know. So it's here we have also and this is actually went to the souvenir shop and I bought this, but just the idea of dog tag. I call this a little art part, but it means something. I haven't quite decided what it means yet, but it kind of feels, you know, just something personal, you know. And you know, here we have, and this is what the USS Alabama was all about. You know, it was about force and putting your physical will, you know, on someone else. You know, so you have this horizontal line that's very restful now, you know, but yet it was what? It's this big ship that could sink another big ship. And then here I have a bowl of pocket change. And you know, as I started doing research, and I've known this for some time, but again, was brought back to my attention again, was the idea of the folks or the kids from Alabama collecting their pennies and ice cream money and change, but the idea to bring the battleship here. You know, so that becomes a suggestion of that, and also it becomes the physical sacrifice economically that generation had to give to be able to win that war. You know, and they really did sacrifice. So you look at the size of the houses that were in the 1940s in comparison to the houses that we have now, which are humongous. You know, they really gave up a lot so that we could be here. Now, again, the title of the piece is that I've worked on is USS Alabama Thinking, and so it is, and it is just that simple. That it's the word thinking, you know, and I'm thinking about memory, you know, and the multiple components of that ship, and the sacrifices and the people that have been part of that, and our life experiences now, and what it kind of tells us about where we are at this point. But I try to sum it up, and I can expand, but it becomes the key that kind of unlocks the door is USS Alabama Thinking. It's not thinking about, but it's that in the end, I'm thinking about that sacrifice and those memories, you know, and how does that relate to what I'm doing? How does that relate to me as an artist? You know, if you look at, again, the horizontal, there's movement, There's all these different components. The suggestion of vessel is something I'm very interested in, and there are symbols that represent all of us. You know, when I think of, you know, the Statue of Liberty, if you had, you know, outside the flag of the United States, Statue of Liberty, you know, it's something my dad talked about as somebody that came over from Holland and came over by ship. And the first thing he saw was he saw was a Statue of Liberty, and it was made by the French and given it to us. But it's just such a beautiful symbol, and I remember seeing it up close, and it just, she's there, you know, and she's welcoming, and yet don't mess with her. You know, she can take some things on. You know, and when I look at that, you know, it really becomes that idea of the centered image, something we kind of represent, you know, that all of us can kind of identify with, and yet I try to bring my little own sensibility of circles and multiple parts, and that of, you know, of memory.